there are a lot of things getting worse that people who are not sitting around this table or in this studio feel every single day. And I think that the problem is that when you call it a situation, or when Michelle Tafoya compares it to a Starbucks cup of coffee, people really turn off from that. And when Michelle
said it was the riskiest thing a president could do.
When Michelle Tafoya in her statement says when I listen to Michelle Tafoya, so this is where I'm addressing it. When she says things like take one less cup of coffee, and you see the coffin come back of the gentleman and his family running up, that's shrouded in the American flag, you know that is not worth just a cup of coffee.
In today's video, Bakari Sellers unleashes on Scott Jennings on NewsNight with Abby Phillip as tensions explode over rising gas prices and the economic fallout tied to the Iran conflict. While Scott Jennings defends Donald Trump, Bakari Sellers pushes back hard, calling out the gap between political talking points and what Americans are actually paying at the pump. The debate quickly turns intense as Bakari Sellers questions the real cost of leadership decisions and who's truly being affected. So let's dive in and watch how Bakari Sellers shuts down Scott Jennings on NewsNight with Abby Phillip.
The thing that strikes me, Bakari, about all of this is that it's not just the war by itself. It's also the broader moment that we're in. The economy is sort of it's in a delicate place right now, where I think the policy decision-making matters a lot. There were no jobs created last year. GDP growth is sort of mid at best, and now you have a war on top of that.
I mean, so at the end of the day, when we leave this show, we all have conversations with real people. When I'm in the barbershop with Tremaine and people are having conversations around with the barbers about March Madness and everything else, the number one question people ask is, why should I care about what's going on in Iran, right? And it's sometimes hard to drill down on it. But people are actually feeling this right now. They're not just feeling the gas prices, but they're feeling the fact that our needs aren't being met on a daily basis. They aren't seeing a clear line of distinction between the two parties. But they also realize that there's real human costs. Because at the end of the day, while the president's hawking shoes and all of his friends are going overseas and making money from defense contracts and whomever, and it's funny how in politics, and I think you said this a couple of blocks ago, how it makes strange bedfellows, how when you start talking a lot, you start sounding like Chip Roy, you start sounding like Marjorie Taylor Greene, with the fact that you see all of Donald Trump's friends making tons of money while average everyday Americans are still angling to make ends meet. And so, yes, I can give the Secretary of Defense and Donald Trump credit for their military objectives on certain things being met. However, the lack of clarity is a problem, and the human cost and the average cost to everyday Americans is a problem. And it's hypocritical for anybody in MAGA to tell me that you're putting America first when you have Americans starving and you're not doing anything but kowtowing to whatever Donald Trump's wishes are.
Let me play, this is Minnesota Senate candidate Michelle Tafoya. She's a Republican.
I hope I don't sound like Michelle Tafoya.
Let me just play what she said, because this is just illustrating how they're struggling to figure out the messaging here.
I know it's frustrating, and I know it's hard for people. What I would say to them is, we've lost some service members over there who have put their lives on the line to protect us. I think right now, at least just kind of keeping a stiff upper lip. Maybe you take one less trip to Starbucks, and so that gas goes a little further until this thing is over and these gas prices come back down again. Let's just try to be patriots about this.
Reminds me of Jimmy Carter. Turn the thermostat down to 50, whatever, 55
or
degrees.
when Pete Hegseth blames the press for the bad coverage of the war, that's like blaming the people covering the plane crash for the plane crashing.
Well, but Scott, you see that there's risk in a message like that. Just tell Americans, don't go to the grocery store quite as much. Don't go to Starbucks. Just suck it up for a little while.
Well, I mean, look, there's risk in everything. Every decision a president makes has risk, and none are riskier than the decision to commit troops to the theater of war, not just because of what can happen in the theater, but because of what can happen at home. Gas looks like it's $3.73 a gallon. It got somewhat higher than that during the Biden administration. It's now, we haven't gotten back to those numbers yet.
Looking at the bigger picture, it really highlights a deeper issue about how economic pressure is being understood versus how it's actually felt. It's not just about defending decisions or explaining risks. It's about whether those explanations line up with what people are experiencing in real time. History shows that when tensions rise in major oil-producing regions like the Middle East, prices don't wait. They react almost immediately, and that impact doesn't stay isolated to gas. It spreads into transportation, food, and basic necessities that people depend on every day. What makes this even more grounded in reality is how fast those global shifts hit at home. When oil supply feels even slightly threatened, markets move quickly, often pushing prices higher based on uncertainty alone. Data from organizations like the International Energy Agency shows that situations involving Iran can shift global supply expectations within days, not months. That means the higher costs people are seeing aren't just perception, they're built into how the system responds. So when people say they're feeling the pressure, it's coming from a direct link between global conflict and everyday expenses. Then there's the messaging issue that's hard to ignore. Telling people to simply cut back on small expenses misses the bigger picture, especially when wages haven't kept up with rising costs. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that real wage growth has been relatively flat when adjusted for inflation, so framing economic strain as something temporary or manageable can come off as out of touch, reinforcing the idea that everyday people are being asked to carry the burden of decisions they had no part in making.
But for candidates, going out and talking to people, they're in a little bit different situation than the commander in chief, who has to look at a national security situation. They have intelligence that nobody else has, and they have to make decisions knowing full well the risks that come with it. He made the call. The polling, by the way, among the Republican Party and among the MAGA friendly voters is quite clear. They trust the president on this. How long it lasts, and when we get out, we'll make a difference on that. But right now, they do stand right behind the president.
30% of the country, and the rest of the country does not agree.
This is the most unpopular war in American history, and for good reason. And the longer it goes on, the worse those numbers are going to look. There is no instance in history of prolonged war benefiting any nation. And how
do you know it's going to be prolonged?
We don't know it's not.
Because that's the story of pretty much every war ever.
How long did the Venezuela war last?
Well, that wasn't a war. That was but
we haven't had a war since World War II, Josh.
Yeah, well, I think the Vietnam generation would take issue with that, and the Iraq generation and the Afghanistan generation.
But I'm saying we haven't declared war.
Yeah, but if you ignore the lessons of all of those wars. So you're sitting here saying a 3-week situation is the most unpopular thing we've ever done. I'm saying that you're using the term war a little. I'm saying that Americans understand what's clear, which is that this is getting worse every day and expanding every day, and
that is getting worse.
The war is expanding. More countries are getting attacked.
What we're forgetting.
The energy crisis is growing. The economic crisis is growing. Inflation is growing. Extremism and attacks on the homeland are growing. Everything is getting worse every day, and the war is expanding, despite President Trump saying
you're not exactly a glass half full kind of guy, are you?
Bakari,
I'm a real.
I was going to say. I was going to comment on that. I was just saying that there are a lot of things getting worse that people who are not sitting around this table or in this studio feel every single day. And I think that the problem is that when you call it a situation, or when Michelle Tafoya compares it to a Starbucks cup of coffee, people really turn off from that. And when Michelle,
I said it was the riskiest thing a president could do.
When Michelle Tafoya in her statement says when I listen to Michelle Tafoya, so this is where I'm addressing it. When she says things like take one less cup of coffee, and you see the coffin come back of the gentleman and his family running up, they're shrouded in the American flag, you know that is not worth just a cup of coffee. Like, when is Washington, D.C. going to wake up, I think is my argument. My argument is not with Scott Jennings. My argument is with people in Washington, D.C.
I'm in Washington.
I'm
very aware.
When you step back and really look at what's going on, it starts to highlight a bigger issue about how risks are being explained versus how consequences actually show up in real life. It's not just about trusting decisions made at the top. It's about how quickly those decisions translate into real-world impact. When conflicts escalate in regions tied to global energy supply, markets don't wait. They react instantly. Once oil starts pushing toward that $90, $100 range, history shows it doesn't stay contained. It spreads into higher gas prices, shipping costs, and everyday goods within weeks. What makes this more grounded is the data behind how these shocks move through the system. Even a modest jump in oil prices can push inflation higher in a short period, while also slowing consumer spending as households adjust. And we're already seeing those ripple effects globally, with central banks warning that rising fuel costs could force tighter economic policies just to keep inflation under control. That's the part people often overlook. These decisions don't stay isolated, they come back around and directly affect what people are paying day to day. Then there's the messaging side, which is hard to ignore. Framing rising costs as something people should just deal with misses how stretched things already are for a lot of households. When energy prices go up, it's not just about the pump. It affects groceries, rent, and basic living expenses through the entire supply chain. Economists have pointed out for years that prolonged instability can slow growth while pushing inflation higher at the same time, creating real pressure on working families. So when people react, it's not overreaction. It's based on patterns we've seen play out before.
The horrendousness of this excursion.
I just want to point out that there is a vast trove of reporting over the last few years saying that the president shouldn't be responsible for gas prices. When Biden was in office, CNN reported Americans blamed Biden for record prices at the pump. Biden had relatively little control over the prices set primarily by global markets. In 2025, CNN reported gaseline prices are coming down, and President Trump is happy to take credit for that. I would just note every other time period, the media tries to say that the president has anything to do with the gas price.
Did President Trump initiate a war that led to higher gas prices?
It depends who you ask. It depends who you ask.
Who initiated this particular conflict?
Look,
Trump and Bibi together.
Look, the answer is
Scott,
yes.
The answer is yes.
Okay, so that's it. But the question is, was it a worthy cause? And did the American
That's
people
actually not the question.
No,
it is the question. That's how the politics shake
that's
out.
not the question that Lydia asked. Lydia asked who's responsible for the gas prices going up $1 per gallon in the last 30 days.
When Russia invaded Ukraine, it was all Putin's prices.
Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, but we knew they were going to do that.
But I'm saying
we
when
decided
Russia invaded Ukraine, everyone was happy to blame Putin. Why can't we blame Iran?
Hold on, guys.
Because we attacked them.
We decided that despite the risk of increased gas prices, we were going to act anyway. I'm not saying that's not a bad decision. That's a bad decision to make. I'm just saying that's a choice that we made, knowing that this was likely going to be the outcome. So President Trump, his response to that is basically, it's going to be brief, and if he's right, cool.
Well,
but if he's wrong,
it's
going to be a problem.
All right, guys. Trump, he claims he didn't know.
He
claims it's all a surprise and he got it all wrong. So I believe him.
He does claim that. No one else does, though. Yeah. Airline passengers and TSA agents are paying the price for that partial government shutdown that we're still in the middle of.
This situation highlights how complex the link between political decisions and everyday costs really is. Gas prices are often portrayed as a direct reflection of presidential action, but the reality is that global markets play the primary role. Disruptions in key energy regions, like the Strait of Hormuz, can influence oil prices worldwide in just a few days. Analysts from the U.S. Energy Information Administration have consistently noted that even minor geopolitical tensions can create rapid price swings at the pump, making it overly simplistic to blame domestic leadership. So when Americans feel the pinch of higher fuel costs, it's often connected directly to global events rather than purely domestic policy. What makes this situation even more tangible is the ripple effect higher energy costs have across the economy. Fuel price spikes don't just affect gas, they drive up shipping expenses, food prices, and the cost of almost every good and service. During past energy shocks, economists at the Brookings Institution observed that inflationary pressure from rising fuel costs can take months to stabilize, affecting households across income levels. This demonstrates that these economic pressures are immediate and far-reaching, touching what families pay week to week for essentials like groceries, commuting, and home heating. Then there's the messaging and accountability problem. Framing rising costs as something people should simply accept can feel out of touch, especially when wages haven't kept up with inflation. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that real wage growth has been relatively flat in recent years, meaning households are already stretched thin. When leadership decisions contribute to higher living costs, it's natural for the public to push back. It's not pessimism, it's reality. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out Ground News in the description down below.